Okay, so this one uh, wasn't a terribly close game. I was sort of running low on time when this one ended, but the player I was up against wasn't being too terribly smart with his moves, which sort of made it easier for me to make it a quicker game. This was a 5-minute blitz game against a Swedish opponent, with me as white and my opponent as black. My usual opening, black, I suppose their usual opening whenever they play. Um, Queen's pawn. He starts stacking a staircase. Uh, King's pawn. Uh, Black here, threatening this pawn over 2 areas. So obviously I'll be down if I don't do anything. So I kind of just take. He takes back, giving him a little more center momentum. I threaten this hanging pawn. He doesn't do anything about it, but I move to f2. He moves his queenside knight to c6. I move my pawn up right here. I go ahead and he blunders right here, as you can see, because he moves this bishop here to defend this pawn, so that if I were to take, he would be able to take back. But that's not what happens, because obviously when you go there, it's immediately capture, and there's nothing he can do about it. He's instantly down 3 points, only 8 moves into the game. And then he proceeds to move his knight here, and he wants to check pawn right here, force me to move and then take my rook, so I go ahead and castle. He takes with his knight, which is odd because I can just take with my knight, now putting me up an extra 2 points. He checks me anyway, move out of the way, and he immediately pulls back, so I take this pawn right here. He threatens with queen, and my queen is protected by the black square bishop, so I go ahead and threaten the knight. He takes with his queen, I take with my bishop, and he then proceeds to move his a pawn for whatever reason, completely giving up this knight. He takes, I take, and now I'm up a considerable amount of points. He continues developing. I check here. He moves. I take with my rook here, now getting it more into play. I want to get this h rook out into play, but I don't end up doing it for a while. He threatens this bishop. I check by moving my knight, putting the king in check by bishop. And this is obviously a blunder because, well, not necessarily, it's not a blunder, but it's supposed to be a trade because now he takes bishop, but instead he just moves his king out of the way, whatever, puts me up an extra 3 points. So I move to c3, protecting this bishop from the rook. He takes, and so I check, and then he is now, from this point, taking my knight and my rook sort of in fault. So the rook is protecting the knight, but there's nothing protecting the rook, so I go ahead and move my light square bishop to protect it. He moves his rook here, sort of to add an extra layer of assault. And so I go ahead and take the pawn here with my knight because the king cannot take this rook. So it's only rook takes rook and then I take, and that would only put me down 3. That's exactly what happened, so now I'm only up 9 points. I threaten his rook, trying to get it out of there. He moves it here, apparently trying to check me, but there's this bishop right here that could go at any time. But then I move it to g7, so that gives him the opportunity to check. I just move it out of the way. There's not a lot he can do. He can't take here, because then I just take back. He moves his pawn, so I just take it. And then he threatens this pawn, even though it's protected by the knight, which is in turn protected by the rook. So at this point, I start pushing out my pawn, but he does a better job of it, I suppose, because I cannot keep this pawn alive. He ends up taking it with his rook, and so I take with my knight, and he takes my knight, so that puts me up 1 point. So now I have this other pawn that I immediately start pushing out. There's nothing he can do about it. As soon as I get all my other pieces protected, he's already behind the pawn. I go ahead and promote it at this point. It's just basic chess, and then I get checkmate right here. 49th move. Obviously can't move here because of the king, can't move here because of the king, can't move here because of the queen and the bishop. I can't take the queen because of the knight, and can't move here because of the queen, so it's checkmate.